So let's take a look first at ocean acidification. First off, there are three species that we're interested in. The first one is carbonate, so CO3 2-, which you can see all the way down here in the part where they talk about coral, right? Marine skeletons, like coral and some other skeletons, contain carbonate, CO3 2-. There's also bicarbonate, which you can see in two other places, right? Those are bicarbonate, HCO3-. And that's just the difference of a hydrogen, right? All you have to do is put an H plus onto a carbonate and you get a bicarbonate. The next one up the scale, right, if I put an H plus on the bicarbonate, I get carbonic acid, H2CO3. And if you notice that H2CO3 ends up in the ocean because of dissolved CO2. And you already know that we have a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that one way to get rid of it, according to the carbon cycle, is for it to be dissolved into the ocean. Well, the thing is, once it's there, it doesn't just stay there. It makes the ocean acidic by making H2CO3. Right? CO2 makes H2CO3. And what that does is, when I put H2CO3 into the ocean, that H2CO3 becomes bicarbonate, and it releases a proton, and that proton takes away carbonate from the ocean. And by decreasing carbonate, we are actually increasing or decreasing the pH of the ocean. Right? The effect is that the more carbonate we take away from the ocean, the more H2CO3 we make, the lower the carbonate gets. That dissolves the coral reef, right? Coral is really calcium carbonate as a skeleton. You also see biodiversity changes, right? If we're decreasing the carbonate, the basic part, and increasing the acidic part, you see the pH of the ocean go down. The pH becomes more acidic, causing coral reefs to dissolve, and then also changes in biodiversity. We talked about this with climate change just a couple of lectures ago, where if you change the pH of an environment, you're changing the types of organisms that can live there. Just a quick review, right? We talked about acid anhydrides in the last lecture, and we said that an acid anhydride is anything that adding water to will make it acid. So our NO2, our NO are acid anhydrides. SO2 and SO3 are acid anhydrides. And CO2, right? There are 5 environmental acid anhydrides. If you'd like to verify that CO2 is an acid anhydride, you can actually do your own demonstration. Remember how in yesterday's lecture, in the first part of Chapter 6, I talked about a universal indicator, and I told you that if you took a red cabbage leaf, boiled it in water, and then you saved that water, that it would change color based on what you mix it with? Well, again, you could try that. Boil that red cabbage leaf, and that water that's left behind is this kind of bluish-purple color. If you get a straw and you exhale into that water for long enough, you'll actually see a color change start to happen. You'll start to make the water acidic. It will go more towards the purpley red side. And so you can prove to yourself that CO2 is an acid anhydride. If I put CO2 in water by blowing into a glass of water with a straw, then I can show that it's acidic because my pH changes. All you need is a red cabbage leaf and some water and some time. So, natural acidity of rain. We already said in previous lectures that CO2 is naturally present in the atmosphere. It's not bad to have CO2. CO2 is responsible for the greenhouse effect, and the greenhouse effect in its proper amount is a good thing. Without it, we'd have a really cold planet. And we said that CO2 is an acid anhydride, so if I add water to it, I get H2CO3. And another way of saying that is I get H plus and HCO3-. Rain is naturally just a little bit acidic. Right? The normal pH of rain is 5.6, isn't it? And if the normal pH of rain is in that 5.6 range, that's lower, more acidic than 7. Rain is not neutral. It could be lower depending on the location. Some atmospheres are naturally a little more acidic than others. So how do we know that rain is too acidic? First off, we have to measure pH, don't we? And the way that we quantify acid concentration in a really precise way is using what's called a pH meter. pH meter is just a little electrode here. So this electrode here can be immersed in whatever you want to measure the pH of, whether it's rain or whether it's a lake or whether it's a solution you make in the lab. And what happens is that H3O+, so hydrogen ion, right? H3O+ is the same as H+, causes a change in voltage at the electrode, and that voltage gets converted to pH. The higher the voltage, the more hydrogen there is there. So we know how to measure it. We're going to use pH meters to do it. It's actually not too expensive of a tool, just a couple $100, and you've got a good way of measuring the pH of your rain or your lake or anything you'd like. The question is, what and where should I measure? So we might be interested in the pH of rainwater first off. Do I have acid rain or do I not? And we collect buckets. In fact, the Watershed Initiative, the Middle Eel River Watershed Initiative in North Manchester, has collection buckets where they collect rainwater, for example, they collect river water, those things, and then they take that water back and they analyze it. Same thing with surface or groundwater. We have sample containers that we put in the river or put in the lake to collect water from them. But the big deal is you have to prevent contamination. If you get extra minerals in there that shouldn't have been there, or oils from your skin or animals or those sorts of things, you're actually contaminating your water. You're introducing things with a pH to the water that shouldn't have been there in the first place. And so preventing that contamination, making sure your glassware, your container is absolutely clean and it's not going to put any extra acid in there, is important. Once you get your water in there, you might be interested in measuring some more things. So the pH meter is actually what's called an ion selective electrode. Right? Ion selective means it looks for a particular ion. And this pH meter, the ion selective electrode, it's selective for H+. But you could imagine that you could have an ion selective electrode for calcium or for sodium or for potassium. There are ion selective electrodes for a lot of different things. For example, again, the Watershed Initiative in our river here is very interested in nitrate concentrations, and they want to know, when the farmers put fertilizer on the fields in the spring, are they contributing too many nitrates to the water? There's an ion selective electrode that you can buy and you can use to look for nitrates. It just looks for a specific compound. So the question is, where is the extra acid coming from? And there's all sorts of chemical sources, right? We said that SOXs like SO2 or SO3 are acid anhydrides. We said that NO2 are acid anhydrides, right? These make acids. You can see the H+ up front. So the extra acid in the rain comes from SOXs and NOXs. How do we know it's there? And how do we know that it's the sulfate, right? The sulfuric acid and the nitric acid. How do we know that they're responsible? Well, first off, we do know that the pH of rain is lower than it used to be, and we can keep tracking that, so it's more acidic than it should be. Second off, we can look at what happens to the rain after it hits the ground. We can monitor the concentrations of sulfate and nitrate in our water, our surface water like our rivers and our lakes, and our soil. And we can notice that those are higher than usual. And so this is a good indicator that those two ions, sulfate and nitrate, which come from acid anhydrides in the atmosphere, are probably responsible for acid rain. Again, we also know that we're pumping these out in large quantities. Back in the first chapter, right, we said that when we burn coal in a coal burning plant, we put out a lot of SO2. We said that NO2 is a secondary pollutant, but it shows up in car exhaust and from emissions there. So why is that bad? Let's look at the SOXs first. So remember, when we burn coal, there's some sulfur in coal, and that sulfur combines with oxygen when you burn it and makes SO2, and that's an acid anhydride. The anthropogenic sources, the human-generated sources, are the highest contributions, and we get about 1 million metric tons of sulfur per year that's burned out, and that's 40,000 metric tons of SO2 per year. There are also natural sources. The oceans release some SO2 from time to time, and volcanoes also release SO2. But again, SO2 in the atmosphere makes SO3, and that SO3 makes H2SO4, and it contributes to acid rain. If we looked at the NOXs, right, the big NOx that we're interested in is NO2 because it makes HNO3. Right, this is a vehicle emissions source of pollution anthropogenically. If you combine dinitrogen, N2, with dioxygen, O2, you get NO, two of them, and that eventually goes on to make NO2. And there's also natural sources of NO2. Soil, so bacteria in the soil will release NO2 as part of processing things. Lightning is also a source of NO2.